Today we're going to look at class Arachnida. So when we're talking about arachnids, we're talking about organisms with four pairs of walking legs. A cephalothorax instead of a separate head and thorax. Usually four pairs of simple eyes, no antennae, and respiration through book lungs. They have 8 legs, which are four pairs, and we're going to separate arachnids as having four pairs as opposed to 3 pairs of legs. What we're separating them against are insects, which have 6 legs, and of course that gives them 3 pairs. The body segments of an insect are also head, thorax, and abdomen, whereas the body segments for an arachnid, again, are cephalothorax and abdomen. Spiders also spin webs to capture prey. Now, most of the time they use their webs for prey to fly into or walk onto, and then the prey gets stuck. Spider silk, though, is incredibly strong. It's also flexible. Essentially, spider silk is as strong as steel pipe of the same size, but it remains very flexible, just like rope, whereas steel pipe is very rigid. Here are just some examples of webs that could be used to capture prey. You see the funnel web, the sheet web, the tangle web, and the common orb web. The modifications to the use of webs can be seen here with the trapdoor spider, who has actually built a burrow and then a web-like trap door that can be triggered, and in the net casting spider, which makes a small web and then extends down using a piece of spider silk to capture prey on the ground. The silk glands and spinnerets are specifically made to produce spider silk, and it's definitely something that helps spiders catch prey. Once prey is caught, the spiders sink their fangs into the prey and use their venom glands to inject a paralyzing venom into the prey. This immobilizes the creature. The spider then secretes the digestive enzymes into the prey's body, and these tissues are then partially digested. And then the spider sucks them through their mouth into their stomach. Spider venom can be fatal to humans, but is rarely so. Some exceptions to the commonly non-fatal bites is the black widow and the brown recluse. Both the black widow and the brown recluse spider are common in North America, and they're primarily after insects, and they only bite humans when disturbed. If bitten by one of these spiders, you should seek medical attention. Here we can see some of the base symptoms for a black widow spider: abdominal pain, muscle cramps, sting mark bites, and it's actually a lot easier to recognize a bite that is not going to be a brown recluse than to try to identify an actual brown recluse bite. For example, you generally don't have numerous bites when you have a brown recluse bite. You're also most likely not going to see the spider still on you. They're very quick. And we also would note that you want to see a white center, not want to see a white center, but you would see a white center as opposed to a red center if it was a true brown recluse bite. Let's take a closer look at spider anatomy. So here we see both the inside and the outside of the spider. We can see on the posterior end in the lower image these spinnerets connected to the abdomen. We can see all eight legs, which are 4 pairs. We can see modified walking legs, which are now pedipalps, which help the spider kind of manipulate their environment. We see the fangs, also known as chelicerae. Hard to see also, but there are eyes also on its cephalothorax. We can also see the location on the upper image of the inside of some of the organs, like that of the stomach and the intestines and the brain and the book lungs. The spider has a complete digestive system, uses modified book lungs to breathe, which are similar to gills in crayfish. And it also has a partially closed, I should say, vascular system, with only a few ostia as opposed to insects, which have many more ostia to make a purely open circulatory system. The book lungs of a spider essentially are doing the same job as gills, but the book lungs extract oxygen from the air, not from water. Air enters the exoskeleton through a slit in the abdomen, which is called a spiracle. The spiracle then leads to the book lungs. So essentially, book lungs are modified lungs. Next, we're going to move on and look at classes Chilopoda and Diplopoda. and this is going to include centipedes and millipedes. Halopoda is home to the arthropods we call centipedes. Diplopoda is going to contain the arthropods we call millipedes. Again, we're looking at arthropods of which Arachnida, now Chilopoda, and Diplopoda are included. When you're talking about Chilopoda, we're talking again about centipedes. And the head of a centipede contains antennae for sensory perception and several mouth parts. They are segmented directly behind the head. The segments contain the first pair of legs, and these first pair of legs contain venomous claws that help immobilize insects and small animals that the centipede eats. Certain types of tropical centipedes can reach up to a foot long, and the bite of a centipede is really dangerous to humans, but can be very painful. If we're talking about Diplopoda, we're talking about something that means 1,000 legs, and that's a millipede, not a centipede. Each segment of a millipede contains 2 pairs of legs, whereas the centipedes contain only 1 pair of legs per segment. Very rarely do people get close enough to figure out if they have 1 or 2 pairs of legs per segment. Millipedes have bodies that are rounded, and centipedes have flat bodies. Millipedes don't have venomous claws, like the centipede, and there's usually shorter antennae on millipedes. They eat vegetation and organic debris, whereas centipedes are fierce predators, and they're going to eat much more than vegetation. They commonly eat other organisms, and millipedes tend to roll into a ball when threatened instead of attack. So here we can see the basic anatomy of centipedes and millipedes. You can see the centipedes on the left in the image on the right, millipedes on the right. We can see the difference in the number of legs per segment, and that's a big indicator whether or not it's a millipede or a centipede. We can also see in the image on the left the more rounded body of the millipede as opposed to the more flattened body of the centipede. And we can see the shortened antennae of the millipede as opposed to the longer antennae of the centipede. Next, we're going to look at class Insecta. Class Insecta also fits within phylum Arthropoda. Class Insecta is the largest class in creation, and it contains numerous species. It makes up more than 3/4 of the species in the animal kingdom. Common characteristics of all of the organisms in class Insecta are 3 pairs of walking legs, so 6 legs, usually wings at some stage in their life, but not all, 1 pair of antennae, and 3 separate body segments. So instead of the cephalothorax of the arachnid, we see a separate head, thorax, and abdomen. A lot of insects use their legs for walking, like other types of arthropods, like crayfish, like lobster. Their legs are also jointed. A variety of secondary functions for legs include things like capturing prey, jumping, walking on water. Insect wings also can be classified, and most insects have 2 pairs of wings. Some have only 1, however. Occasionally, some have none. But the 4 basic types of wings are as follows in class Insecta. Membranous wings are thin and transparent. Scaled wings are delicate scales over these types of essentially very flat structures, and we would see scaled wings in butterflies. Leather-like wings appear to be a part of the exoskeleton. For example, you can see that up there in the firefly. And horny wings are similar to leather-like wings, but cover most of the entire insect. So it has to do with the amount of geography covered on the back of the insect. Let's use a grasshopper as our representative insect. They have a complete digestive system, an open circulatory system, meaning their blood can exit blood vessels. They have 2 wings on each side for total. They have a head, thorax, and abdomen, antennae, and they primarily use their legs for walking and or hopping. When you're talking about respiration and circulation for insects, we have to talk about the tracheas. The tracheal system for breathing is common to insects, and that's going to allow oxygen to be exchanged with the external environment. Because the tracheas are connected to the outside environment through a series of small holes called spiracules. And the tracheas essentially run air throughout the entire body of the insect, and that provides oxygen to all tissues. Insects also have a circulatory system to carry nutrients. They have Malpighian tubules that are specialized structures that clean blood when it runs over them, Malpighian tubules reside near the intersection between the stomach and the intestine. We didn't talk about them in arachnids, but some arachnids also have Malpighian tubules. Insects also have simple and complex eyes, and it just depends on the type of insects. Typically, the compound eye provides vision, while the simple eye registers the presence or absence of light. And they also have a nervous system. They have a ventral nerve cord that primarily is going to move along their belly, and that's going to help kind of essentially make up the backbone of an insect's nervous system, or the main part. Grasshoppers even have a tympanic membrane, or essentially a modified organ of hearing. It's just in their abdomen instead of on their head. Grasshoppers have a mandible that's designed for chewing. Mosquitoes have a specialized lancet to pierce the skin. Flies have a sponge like mouth used to absorb food. And moths and butterflies have a proboscis. This is a specialized tongue, essentially, designed to siphon pollen. So there's tons of different variations for feeding apparatus or insects. Food is essentially going to be mixed with digestive enzymes before it enters the mouth in many insects and is further processed in parts like the esophagus or the crop or the gizzard. The gizzard is for grinding and it's usually followed by the intestines, and indigestible foodstuff exits out the rectum, specifically via the anal canal. And digestive enzymes are primarily produced by the stomach or parts of the mouth. A lot of the digestive enzymes in a grasshopper, for example, though, come from modified structures that function in digestion and absorption called a gastric ceca. We can also look at reproduction and development in insects. The female and male species usually are completely separate in class Insecta. The females receive sperm from the males during mating but store it for a time in seminal receptacles. We've heard of seminal receptacles before when we talked about annelids. When the females lay their eggs, they are fertilized by the stored sperm, and this stage of an insect's life cycle is called the egg stage. When they hatch, most insects are in a young stage called the larval stage. They resemble essentially kind of a segmented worm. The insect eats and molts over and over again, then enters the pupa stage, forming some kind of casing around itself. The casing may be made of exoskeleton or woven fibers. During this stage, the pupa develops organs, and their organs are rearranged and reshaped, and body structures are essentially dismantled and reformed. Once the transformation and reformation has occurred, the insect breaks out of the casing and enters the adult stage. We can compare this type of metamorphosis to the two types that can occur in insects. The types are complete and incomplete metamorphosis. Incomplete metamorphosis, insect development consisting of 4 stages, occurs, including the egg, larva, pupa, and adult. In incomplete metamorphosis, it only includes the egg, nymph, and adult. Essentially, a nymph is a younger version of the adult. There's no separate larva or pupa stage in incomplete metamorphosis. The nymph phase essentially is also going to have miniature structures of the adult form and usually lacks wings. So here we can see complete metamorphosis on the left, where we have both the egg, larvae, pupa, and adult stage. And then on the right, we have the egg, young nymph, and later nymph, so essentially the nymph stage, and then finally the adult, but no pupa or larva stage in incomplete metamorphosis, which we see on the right. And then let's just look at a couple of examples of orders that fall in class Insecta, like Ordo Lepidoptera. Those are the butterflies and moths that have scaled wings and also are going to be able to open and close their wings for flight. Butterflies tend to close their wings while resting, where moths lay their wings horizontally while resting. We could look at order Hymenoptera, ants, bees, and wasps, and these have membranous wings and fingers. And only ants with reproductive capabilities have wings. And a lot of those in this order are considered social insects. Order Coleoptera is beetles. All members of this order have horny wings. Diptera is flies, gnats, and mosquitoes. And all of these organisms within this order are going to use membranous wings to fly. And they're going to have designated mouthpieces that either pierce, suck, or bite. And oftentimes when they do so, they can pass bacteria or viruses to humans. Order Orthoptera is grasshoppers and crickets, which usually can perform some type of chirping, which is common in species of this order. Stridulation is used to attract mates for the purpose of mating, and stridulation is the name of the chirping they perform. And now let's look a little bit at echinoderms. Echinoderms are going to be in their own phyla. Phyla Echinodermata includes sea urchins, sea stars, sand dollars, sea cucumbers, and are all examples of echinoderms. They lack cephalization, they don't really have a head, and they have an oral and a boral side. The oral side is the side where they release their stomach, and the opposite side is the boral. They have larvae that generally exhibit bilateral symmetry, but adults are going to exhibit radial symmetry, and their body parts are usually in fives around a central body. Adults. All echinoderms have an endoskeleton that is going to have spiny skin protrude outside of the body, essentially producing spiky skin. They have a water vascular system that has tubes, and these tubes are called oftentimes tube feet because they help with locomotion and respiration. Echinoderm actually just means spiny skin, so their appearance is where they garner their name. The water vascular system is very unique to echinoderms. It's water-filled canals that branch into structures called tubed feet, and the tube feet are not only for respiration and locomotion, but they're also for feeding. But the use of essentially a system of water to move, feed, or breathe is very specific to echinoderms like the sea star. For example, sea stars eat bivalves, and they use their tube feet to pry open clams just enough to inject their stomach into the clam from their oral side. Their external stomach releases digestive enzymes externally that break down the clam's insides, and then they absorb it. The sea star essentially pulls its stomach once done back to its body, including the pieces of the digested clam. And then sea urchins, in comparison, use a five-part jaw-like structure to scrape algae from rocks. And so there are some modifications to the water vascular system and the uses of tube feet. But the water vascular system does act as the sea star circulatory system in its case, and the tube feet are functioning in gas exchange at the same time, allowing for locomotion and capturing of prey. When you think about echinoderms, we have to acknowledge the numerous amount, not quite as much as the class Insecta, but there's still about 7,000 known species of echinoderms within Echinodermata, a phylum. It includes things like brittle stars and sea urchins and sea lilies, sea cucumbers, sun stars, and sand dollars. Here are just some of the echinoderms. You can see in the upper left the jaw-like pieces of a sea urchin. So you can see that it literally eats algae. It's going to use teeth-like processes to do so. We can see a sea cucumber down in the bottom left. You can see a couple of different types of sea anemones or sea lilies on the right. Here's a sand dollar in the upper left, a brittle star in the upper right, and we can see a sea star in the lower right. And if I time it just right, you can see here it releases its stomach from its oral side, right here. Here we can see the locomotion of some of the echinoderms. We can see the tube feet here of the sea star. We can see them on the bottom being used to move the clam towards the oral side or the stomach of the sea star. And we can see how they can be used for locomotion in the bottom right. We can also see in the upper right how the tube system moves throughout all the arms of a sea star. And that is it for a closer look at invertebrates. Up next, we're going to move into vertebrates, or at least start talking about the idea of phylum Chordata.